I'm explaining a film from 2014 titled The Deadlands. Spoilers ahead. Enjoy the content. The story begins with a conflict between the two largest tribes in the region, namely the Tumanako tribe and the tribe led by Wairipa. The two tribes continued to fight and were involved in wars that claimed many victims. Then a group from another tribe, led by the chief's son named Wairipa, arrives. His arrival was met with calm. The goal of his visit was to undertake a pilgrimage to his ancestors' graves in line with customs or traditions to commemorate his forefathers. Wairipa was on his way to his ancestral cemetery when he became aware that he was being followed by the chief's son, Hongi. When Wairipa arrived at his destination, he conducted a rite to honor his ancestors. We don't know what was on Wairipa's thoughts, but he instead defecated on the ancestor's head. When Hongi observed him from a distance, he became enraged and hurled a rock at Wairipa before fleeing and intending to report it. But unfortunately Wairipa caught him first, then he brought him to his father. Wairipa instead distorted the facts and accused Hongi of defecating at the ancestral place earlier. He denied this and tried to convince his father that it was not his doing. Wairipa was likewise prepared to have his head hacked off as long as the two tribes were at peace, but he insisted that the conflict must continue. The chief then told Wairipa and his soldiers that their coming and the blasphemy against his tribe were only a pretext to go to battle. Finally, the chief ordered his forces to go on alert and to battle. Day after day, he described how long ago the tribes lived in peace. This should have continued till now, when peace between tribes is preserved rather than fighting, which only ends in tragedy. At night they suddenly received a sudden attack. Hongi had to let himself go into the abyss due to a kick from the attacking tribe. The Tumanako tribe was massacred, leaving only women so they could not marry and have any more children. Finally, Wairipa apprehended the chief, murdered him, and severed his head. When Hongi awoke from her fainting the next morning, he went back to his village, but all of them had died, leaving just the ladies. Seeing this brutal truth infuriated him, and he vowed vengeance on whoever had carried out this horrific crime. Hongi resolves to track down Wairipa and murder him with his own hands. In the meantime, Wairipa is on his way to their hamlet and chooses to take a shortcut to get there faster. But someone named Rengi asked him if he was sure he wanted to go through there, because that road would pass through an area called the Land of Death, where there were great warriors who had massacred their own tribe. While Hongi is on the trail of Wairipa and his warriors, he is abruptly given a glimpse through another realm by his ancestor. The ancestor said that he was too irresponsible and just thought solely on desire by pursuing Wairipa and his warriors alone. He also claimed that they knew who would assist Hongi in carrying out the retribution. After that, Hongi continued his adventure deeper into the jungle, till he came upon a head stuck in a spear, at which point a woman approached and asked him what he was doing. The woman said that anyone who entered this forest would not be able to return. Hongi asked the woman to be taken to a fighter who was said to live in the forest. Hongi was then brought into the house where there was someone sitting in front of the fireplace. What was worse, that person was eating human flesh. But Hongi was unfazed, claiming that he was following Wairipa, who had reached this region. The warrior, as he was known, didn't care about Hongi's narrative. He was just concerned with whether or not to eat Hongi's flesh for the next meal. While Wairipa and his soldiers are relaxing, one of them notices a lizard, which is a terrible omen, indicating that they are all in danger. They joked that they were cursed by the chief they killed the day before. The next morning, Wairipa and his men resumed their trek. For some reason, his troops selected the southern road, perhaps because they recalled what happened the night before. Elsewhere, the warrior decides to follow Hongi to chase Wairipa and his troops. Unfortunately for Wairipa's men who break away, they instead encounter the fighter and Hongi. Of course this was an easy thing for the fighter and Hongi to finish off Wairipa's men. In short, night came, the fighter ate the meat of Wairipa's men who he had killed earlier. Hongi was concentrated on training martial arts when a warrior passed by and scoffed at her, stating her martial arts were terrible. The warrior then taught him a more competent martial technique, which Hongi eagerly practiced despite having to be hurt. The next morning, they resumed their trek, and after a lengthy walk, they discovered evidence of Wairipa and his troops. The fighter yelled purposefully so that Wairipa and his men could witness it. At first, Hongi was perplexed as to how to deal with it. Clearly, this was part of the fighter's strategy. Then Wairipa and his men looked for a more spacious place to fight. When they were waiting for them, the fighter ordered Hongi to run after killing one of Wairipa's men. Seeing that the fighter was alone, Wairipa to look for Hongi. Then the battle began where the fighter who was alone faced many of Wairipa's men. Meanwhile, Wairipa's men finally find Hongi. A fight between them is inevitable. After fighting fiercely, Hongi finally won the fight. Back to the fighter who was being surrounded, apparently he managed to kill all of Wairipa's men. The warrior was about to die from weariness when Hongi arrived and saved him. Now it's only the two of them fighting it out against the rest of Wairipa's men. Eventually, Wairipa's men flee in panic, but the fighter gets stabbed and injured. After the combat, Hongi brought the critically injured warrior to a safe location to rest and heal his wound. Luckily Hongi knew about traditional medicine that could heal his wounds. He brought a mushroom so that the fighter could communicate with his ancestors. Because he had been delirious all night about his ancestors, that's why Hongi brought him the mushroom as an intermediary. Finally, the warrior wants to communicate. As soon as the fighter awakens and is in another world, he is informed that they have been supported by their ancestors. The next morning, one of Wairipa's soldiers dies as if cursed, but the haughty and obstinate Wairipa continues on his way. While Hongi and the warrior were seeking for food, Hongi asked the tribe's chief if they had seen Wairipa and his warriors going through this forest. They answered they had not. Then the tribal leader offered Hongi and the warrior to stay in their tent for the night. He also offered other help, but Hongi refused. Because Hongi refused, she met the fighter. While holding the wound of him, the chief said that he must be responsible for the death of other members of her tribe. The fighter, of course, did not accept the accusation. In the end the two of them fought. Finally the chief died at the hands of the fighter. Hongi actually wanted to stop him, but unfortunately he was too late. Given Hongi's rage, why didn't the fighter show some compassion, especially given she was a woman? The warrior reasoned that if he allowed the lady survive, he would presume the fighter was an ordinary person who could be vanquished, and hence others would eventually come to the land of death and occupy it. Whatever the reason, Hongi refused to accept it, claiming that murdering that woman was an act of disgrace and that he was not a genuine knight. The warrior then remembers back to a time when he was told to murder his wife and kid, and to make matters worse, his father also commanded him to do it. For the honor of his tribe. Instead of killing his wife and children, the warrior killed all the tribesmen while they were all asleep because he had been betrayed. In short, they found Wairipa and his men in an uninhabited place. They entered the place and immediately attacked Wairipa and his men. Wairipa unexpectedly brought Hongi's father's head to torment him when he was imprisoned inside with the warrior. Hongi revolted and was going to assault him, but the warrior stopped him and claimed he had other intentions. Apparently, the warrior planned to starve Wairipa and his men to death by shutting the barrier they had built themselves, trapping them within without food or water. Because they knew Wairipa and his soldiers had no food or water supplies in the fort, the warrior and Hongi opted to wait in front of it. Feeling that one of Wairipa's men was thirsty to drink his own blood, Wairipa considered this to be defiance, so he killed him. Inadvertently, Wairipa's men found weapons stored in wooden boxes that seemed to be relics from the tribe there before. The arrogant Wairipa said that it was his ancestors who had placed these weapons and that they were specially made for them. Suddenly, the warrior and Hongi toss something into the fort that looks like a smoke bomb, and Wairipa and his men retaliate by throwing spears at Hongi and the fighter, but they are able to evade and escape. Hongi entered the fort entrance as soon as she saw her father's head embedded in a spear, but it turned out to be a trap, as the fort door was closed and Hongi was imprisoned inside. The warrior who was after him, on the other hand, was stopped by Wairipa's men. Unhappily for him, the warrior was wounded in the stomach by a spear, but he was able to live and continue to battle despite his injuries. After the warrior managed to defeat Wairipa's men, he returned to the fort and saw Hongi fighting. He went in and helped Hongi. Before the warrior could enter, he was confronted by Rengi first. The fight between them was inevitable. Apparently Rengi was very tough. He almost lost the fight, but finally he managed to turn things around and beat him. Meanwhile, Wairipa is still entrenched. The warrior also helped Hongi. Unfortunately, Wairipa attacks him and makes him die. Hongi was enraged when he realized this and promptly beat him black and blue. But Hongi did not murder him. Instead, he made Wairipa pledge not to bother his people again, and Wairipa fled that region. Meanwhile, Hongi dashed towards the warrior to check on him. Apparently, the warrior was still alive, and when Hongi approached him to hear his final words, the warrior stated that he saw all of his deceased ancestors present. Then Hongi stated he was willing if the warrior wanted to go with his ancestors, and he pledged to inform his surviving clan about how magnificent the warrior was. The warrior has died in an honorable way. Hongi let go, along with the end of this film. That's all the recap. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to stay updated with recaps of our latest films. Your support would be appreciated. I hope to see you next time.